It's great to be here, Tom. What a great intro. Thank you very much. And thank you for the compliment. I don't feel old at all. Before we get into our talk, which we're super excited about, Amy and I are looking forward to bringing our insight to you today. And you can see we're going to have some fun along the way, but we thought it would probably be quite important just to tell you a little bit more about Cambridge Design Partnership before we get into it, because some of you don't know who we are and what we do. So here's our HQ in Cambridge, a really, really amazing innovation centre. And ultimately, we work across three key industries. So consumer, which is where I focus, healthcare, and industrial. And what's really exciting about CDP is that you'll find that innovation challenges are very similar across those different industries. We get the chance to look at all of those things and cross-pollinate innovation across all those areas. So it's a world of really interesting people, 200 plus innovation experts. And I think what we want to talk to you about today is the kind of conference theme, right? Innovation horizons, dreaming dreams, thinking big. There are so many different things out there in the world today that we could get excited about. And indeed, this screen is just a snapshot of some of the amazing things that Amy and I and the team at CDP have had the chance to work on, whether it's next generation solar panels or microsurgical robotics, or just really, really exciting new innovation in packaging. We're looking at this world all the time, and we're thinking about these incredible infinite horizons, infinite opportunities with our clients all the time. But part of the challenge really here as innovators is how do we move away from the infinite and start to boil things down? You know, we are bombarded today by a world full of new things, and of course we spoke about it, didn't we, loads. I hate to mention those two letters again, but I will. You know, AI is changing how we live, how we think, how we do things. There's breakthroughs in science and technology. There are new products and services emerging all the time, connected technologies, immersive environments. And ultimately, it's impacting all the categories and sectors that we work on in this room. The possibilities are endless, and Amy, it does seem so exciting. And I suppose if we wind back 30 years ago, one of the things that we wanted to bring to bear today is this idea, and partly because CDP is 30 years old, we're having our anniversary as well. But Toy Story, do you remember the first Toy Story? Do you remember it? Yeah? Put your hand over if you like Toy Story. I do like Toy Story. So it was a lovely presentation to welcome, because I love Toy Story. And I remember, I first saw Toy Story 30 years ago thinking, wow, this is the future. The way in which the stories were told, the way in which animation was being used was just so exciting. And we thought, wow, this is the future. This is how things are going to be in the future. But Buzz Lightyear's mantra as part of that first film, this to infinity and beyond, was like a call to action to anyone that thought, yeah, this is something that I want to be part of. I want to be part of a future of possibilities. But how many of us in this room, me included, feel like maybe there are just too many possibilities, right? There's too many possibilities available to us today. There's too many things to choose from. And one of the things that ultimately myself and Amy are responsible for day in, day out is, front end of innovation. Many of you here are doing the same thing, right? We're running workshops. And you can imagine, right, we're standing there in front of the board. There is 1,000 post-it notes, all the colours of the rainbow. There's loads of ideas up there. Maybe it's a digital whiteboard these days. But put your hands up if you're old enough to remember that word that everyone used to love using, which was ideating. Yeah? People used to love to ideate. They used to come into a room, we used to have loads of snacks on the table, and they'd be like, let's do some ideating, and they'd be getting loads of ideas out there, and we'd be looking at a board full of this is great, this is creative. But at the end of the day, we got to a point, didn't we, where we were saying, come on everyone, let's get those ideas out. There is no such thing as a bad idea.
And when we're innovating, we ask ourselves the questions, or I do often, of which of these ideas is actually going to benefit the end user, and which of these ideas is actually going to give us a significant return on investment. I think from how I'm speaking, you can tell the difference between myself and James. We've got the optimist over there, the dreamer, and we've got the pragmatist here. But at CDP, we spend as much time assessing and killing ideas as we do generating them, because we really need to make sure that whatever ideas we're coming up with hit the commercial necessities of that brief. So we try and really balance that pragmatic Horizon 1 concept with the more kind of aspirational Horizon 3 North Stars. And that's really the challenge that we're facing, we're going to talk about today, is that infinite ideas, but resources are finite. So as James mentioned, Toy Story and CDP are turning 30, and just to really hammer home that metaphor, we thought Toy Story would be a great metaphor for innovation personality types here. So we've got Woody, first and foremost. He is the defender of the status quo. He is going to keep what is working, and maybe a little bit better as well. Then we've got Buzz. Buzz is our dreamer. He is constantly living in the future and just really reaching for that infinite horizon. And then finally, we have Rex. Rex represents the fear of change. He reminds us that even when we have really exciting opportunities, that there's always hesitation and uncertainty to manage. So at CDP, we like to think that we're a little bit of a mix of all three of those innovation types. We get super excited by new technologies, by consumer insights. We relentlessly assess and prioritize ideas to make sure that the right ones are moving to execution, and we execute them in a way that makes them succeed in the real world. So if we think back to some of those post-it notes that James showed earlier, some of those ideas will make it into market, but that doesn't guarantee success. So if we think about being in a very crowded supermarket shelf, there's hundreds of products that are vying for our attention and to be purchased. But just because you can launch something doesn't mean that it will resonate or last. And that's really what the crux of our talk is about today. It's about infinite ambition colliding with that finite reality. Because for us, innovation isn't just about dreaming big or generating lots of lovely ideas on post-it notes. True innovation is about making disciplined, evidence-based decisions that really cut through the noise. So it's about focusing on those ideas that are genuinely going to create value, and not just for users, but also for the companies, and delivering them in a way that will make them succeed in the real world.
So let's start with the infinite side of the equation, and yet maybe I'm a bit more on the Buzz Lightyear side of things, Amy, maybe you're right. But the opportunity spaces that we're looking into these days, right, they've never felt bigger. The technology is converging to produce and provide opportunities for us that we never had before. And as I mentioned before, you know, AI is now prompting us in ways that allow us to do things so much more quickly and develop products that are actually going to be able to give us information in real time, totally changing the way that we navigate the world. We've got digital tools that can track and predict and influence consumer behaviour. And we've got, as a result, entirely new categories that are emerging at this incredible intersection. But consumers are asking for more. They want healthier, they want tastier, they want more convenient, they want more affordable, they want more sustainable. They all want all of these things all at once. And it's really exhilarating to be thinking about this future. But at the same time, it's really overwhelming. And part of this is ultimately a real challenge when you're thinking about how you lead and navigate and work with different client teams. We were working with a client team not that long ago, and they had a great innovation pipeline already. It wasn't that they needed new ideas, they had loads of ideas. There were new formats, new pack sizes, new flavours, new features, new everything in there, and half the projects in that pipeline had been stuck for months, some of them way longer. And it wasn't because the ideas in and of themselves were bad, it was because the resources that they had as an organisation were finite. And so infinite possibility and ambition collided with finite capacity. That's what happens, right? That's what happens in our workaday world all the time. And that's basically what means that the easy things get done, right? The easy things get done, but the difficult things, the things that are challenging, they get postponed. And so infinite possibilities are pulling us in one direction, but the finite realities pull us back like gravity. Time, money, lack of resource, lack of human attention, these are all the constraints that ultimately pull us back down. And so what we deeply believe is that success really comes from helping to filter, prioritise, and focus on those ideas that really truly matter. What's going to break through? And that's where we use this DVF framework. Very simple, but super effective. So ultimately, what's desirable? This is a key question. Yes, we might have a million ideas, but what's really going to break through? What is going to connect with your customer, with your patient, with your end user? That is key. What's ultimately going to be feasible? What can you actually make? Sometimes we'll have great innovation workshops and find out that as much as the ideas are super whizzy, we can't make any of them. So what was the point? So feasibility is obviously really key. And viable. From the business's point of view, what is going to work, what's going to fit within their portfolio, what's going to fit within their capability, and what's actually going to give them a commercial return on the investment. And to navigate the infinite possibilities, we need to use a framework such as this. And this framework is embedded in the next 3 case studies that we're going to share with you this morning.
Thank you, James. So far we've kind of explored this central tension of innovation, this infinite possibilities colliding with this finite attention and finite resources. James has mentioned DVF, which is our preferred framework to prioritize and assess opportunities. But over the next few minutes, we're going to take you through some real-life projects that we've been working on recently at CDP from 3 different sectors, so one from healthcare, one from FMCG, and one from Femtech. But each of them have in common the fact that they began with a very wide possibility of potential ideas or technologies, and all needed very clear evidence-based outcomes. So hopefully what you'll hear are 3 journeys from possibility to precision, with each one showing how a different balance of desirability, viability, and feasibility can turn what is often a very overwhelming landscape into very clear and confident direction. So the first one I want to talk about is in healthcare, and we've seen quite a difference in how innovation is taking part in healthcare recently. So for years, progress was defined by new therapies, smarter devices, digital monitoring. But what we've seen happening in healthcare is that sustainability is becoming an equally powerful driver of change in this industry as well. And healthcare companies are under mounting pressure to not only develop systems and devices that are effective for the patient, but that are also responsible for the planet. And that's the context in which this first project sits within. So one of our healthcare clients came to us with a challenge that, I'll be honest, seemed pretty simple at first sight. So they wanted us to design a take-back program for medical devices that were used in the home by patients. So this is a system, a kind of national, global system, where patients could return those used devices so they could be recycled or repurposed instead of thrown away in the trash, which is what happens to millions of devices at the moment. So the overall goal of this project was to maintain patient safety, maintain their trust, but all while increasing sustainability outcomes. So on paper, there's a huge number of possible solutions that we can use for this. We can use mail-back envelopes, we can do drop-offs, we can do collection drives through pharmacies, we can leverage things like digital reminders, and the list goes on. But the real question with this challenge wasn't what could we do, it wasn't what's possible, it was what are patients actually going to do. Because we could design the most well-engineered, the most sustainable take-back program you've ever seen, but if patients won't partake in it, it's no good. So that's where we really focused on this project, on that real human behavior. So the first step was to map that patient journey using underlying behavioral science principles and really identifying every moment of friction in that journey. So every moment where a patient might delay, forget, or just give up in returning their devices. We looked for what motivated patients to participate, and conversely, we looked for what created barriers. And then we validated those assumptions with primary research. So we went out speaking to patients and clinicians directly to understand their thoughts about a take-back program and what would motivate them. So armed with those insights, we developed several different pathways for ways that these devices could be returned. And we explored how different take-back program structures, from the clarity of the messaging from a clinician, from the information provided to them, to physically how easy it was to return that device, affected real patient behavior. And every step was scrutinized. So we looked at how intuitive the packaging was. We looked at how clear the instructions were, and we physically measured how much time and effort a patient would have to give up to return this device. So how far do they have to drive to drop it off? How far do they have to walk? That kind of thing. So through this process, we identified one pathway that works for our client that has the right blend of patient convenience, regulatory compliance, which is very important in this sector, and also sustainability improvements. And excitingly, this is a very recent project, so this pathway is now going into pilot production in both the US and in Europe in early 2026, so we'll get real-world data about how patients are taking part in it. And while this case study is kind of very firmly rooted in healthcare, I think there's a lot of lessons that we can take from it, whether you're thinking about recycling or loyalty schemes or refill systems in FMCG. Success doesn't come down to human behavior, or success does, come down to human behavior, and people don't engage with these things because they should. They think they should, but they won't. They engage because it's easy and it's intuitive and it fits into their daily lives. And I think what this project taught the CDP team is that complexity can really kill adoption, but simplicity can drive it.
As you can probably tell by now, Dr. Amy King is the sensible one of the two of us. I get to work on other categories. They don't let me work in healthcare, but I, for the last 25 plus years, thanks Tom, have been working in the world of FMCG products. And so the case study that I'm going to share with you now is based on booze. It's the alcoholic beverage industry, and this industry is going through huge amounts of change and radical reform because consumers aren't drinking as much. Consumers want new things. Consumers want experiences. Consumers want to be taken on a journey. They want an adventure. And so they're big mega trends that are now really starting to impact this industry in a way that's going to change the way that products and services have to show up in this space. It's an industry that's been declining, it's in need of transforming, and innovation has got to drive a new way of growth. So we had a huge privilege to work with the Absolute company, not just to think about what they were going to be doing in their innovation pipeline in the next 2, 3, 4, even 5 years, but actually what would the next 15 to 20 years look like if we looked at the emerging trends and technologies that would be available. And we thought about this big mega trend that is ultimately having a huge impact across all FMCG categories, hyper-personalization. So ultimately, how can we find a way to give the consumer exactly what they need in terms of the experience of getting the product, but the experience that they're actually going to have of tasting the product? And what is that taste experience? And what is that flavour that that particular person, at that particular day, at that particular time, would like to have? And so we looked at this innovation landscape, and frankly, it was just huge. It was really, really difficult for the team to get their head around the complexity and the magnitude of what it is that we were looking at with a 15 to 25 year time frame. And so in a world where everything felt possible, how would we know where to focus? How would we know what ultimately would be desirable and what would be technically feasible and what would be sustainable for the business? And so where Cambridge Design Partnership came in is ultimately with our framework, the DVF framework, yes, but also our futuring framework, to really start to think about how you would take the core equity of the brand, you'd project it into the future, and you would think about the things that are starting to converge now, the technologies that would be transformational in terms of how people navigate packaging in future and how people experience things like taste. And once we looked out with huge lenses to look at all the different possibilities, we then quite quickly brought that back to start to think about actually how it would land for Absolute, what would actually work in the context of actually their product and the things that they wanted the consumers to be able to experience, that they felt consumers were going to be asking for through this high personalisation lens. And so a small number of concepts with both that emotional pull that we talked about, but also the commercial promise that we felt was achievable with those future technologies, started to develop their pipeline of the future. We had to have a practical understanding of which futures were worth pursuing. And we gave Absolute not just a vision for the future, but a really clear and concise set of concepts that would be their North Stars for the way in which business transformation would happen. The answer in this case was not because it was so huge a landscape to try and dream smaller. It was all about making sure that we filtered smarter and we found the intersection between all of those emergent technologies. What's technically feasible, what's consumer friendly, and what is commercially viable.
Okay, so for our final example, I'm going to take you through something in the femtech space. So we've seen kind of really a rapid kind of increase in the amount of innovation in femtech, especially looking at kind of diagnostic tools, connected devices, wearables, any kind of product that can help a woman to better understand their body and their health. But personally, I think with that growth comes a huge challenge, and that challenge is how do we balance that technical innovation with simplicity and comfort in that final product? And that's the landscape in which this example really sits in. So a femcare client approached us with, to be honest, a pretty difficult technical challenge. So they asked us if there was a way to identify a diagnostic technology that could be incorporated into a pant liner to enable detection of oncoming infection. I'm going to let that sit for a second because we were terrified. That's quite a big ask. So obviously this was a hugely ambitious project, and it sits really at that intersection of personal care and healthcare. But the client also recognised that the leap here from idea to execution was huge, and that's where the CDP team came in. So we started this project by doing a desk-based exercise. We did a scan to create a landscape of potential technologies, so identifying any diagnostics that could accurately detect the biomarkers that we were looking for in that intimate and kind of variable condition. So we quickly went to prioritizing those technologies, and then we actually moved into proof of principle lab-based testing, because the crux of this was really, is that technology going to work in real life? And luckily there was one technology that showed most promise and most potential. So we found a technology that could detect the right infection biomarker accurately and effectively. But it did have a catch, and that catch was that under certain circumstances, it triggered a false positive. It wasn't every time, but in certain kind of everyday conditions, so if you're in a hot climate, if the liner was exposed to too much sweat, if it was the user had been exercising, it could read a false positive. So we went back to the lab and we had a look at workarounds. What could we add to this concept to get over that false positive? And the team, the applied science team at CDP, found a way. So we solved that issue. We ended up having to change the concept a little bit to incorporate this workaround into the overall design. But once we understood those technical realities, we moved to manufacturability, because there was kind of no point in moving forwards with this idea if we couldn't produce this efficiently or affordably. So to find out, the client shipped us part of their manufacturing line to our pilot production facility in Cambridge, and we ran manufacturing trials. So this wasn't a simulation. We had their machine, we had their materials, and we put our diagnostic technology into it in different ways to figure out what would work best technically, but also what could be manufactured. And actually at this point the outcome was pretty impressive. So their existing lines only needed a small amount of modification to be able to run this new liner product. So at this point technically it worked and commercially it's feasible. And honestly, we were giving ourselves a little pat on the back. We were quite happy. We were quite scared by this challenge. I think you can see where I'm going. But so far, everything's looking good. Then we came to the final step, which was consumer testing. And this was led in-house by the client themselves. And this is where the kind of complexity raised itself again. So the design challenges that we had to make to get this product to work, to alleviate those false positives, made this concept more difficult to use in real life. It added friction, it added layers of complexity to the end user, and fundamentally it wasn't a compelling proposition for them anymore. So I think at this stage in the project, the insights were pretty clear. Technical feasibility and manufacturing capability are essential, but they're definitely not the finish line. If that end user experience with the product is clunky, if it's inconvenient, it's never going to earn a place in someone's routine. So in the end, this project became one of those really powerful reminders that the most advanced idea is not always the most valuable one, and that actually sometimes the smartest and bravest thing you can do is to stop. And that's exactly what this client did. This was a very quick project to give them initial feasibility of whether this very ambitious idea would succeed, and we gave them that. And we decided to stop. And now what we're doing is we're going back to that wide landscape of diagnostic technologies that we identified at the beginning. We've now got even more user data, we've got more technical data, and we've got more insight into manufacturability. So we're reassessing those to come up with new product concepts for their H1 and H3 horizons. But I think this project specifically, the team kind of felt that, we learned that success doesn't come from how much complexity you can add, but from how much simplicity you can preserve in that final product.
So, 3 projects from 3 different sectors with different problems, but ultimately the same truth. Innovation is not about doing more. It's about doing the right thing. And so some key lessons from the talk we'd love to make sure that embedded this morning for you guys is that, yes, you've got a lot of opportunities potentially, but you need to filter those through that DVF framework. What's desirable? What's viable? What's feasible? Always have that at the front mind. Orientate those ideas as well to the real user behaviour. Is it a great idea? Do you know it's a great idea? Does the consumer think it's a great idea? Check with the person that's going to be using this. Test with them. Iterate those ideas to make them work, but sometimes you've got to stop because managing infinite horizons should not require infinite effort. It requires disciplined choices based on evidence. And when we focus on what matters as innovators, we can cut through the noise, we can reduce wasted effort, and come on, let's be honest, there's plenty of that, right? And we can deliver innovation that works in the real world. So back to our Toy Story theme, let's just remind ourselves of these amazing characters. Buzz, he helps us dream big. He's the innovator's dreamer. Rex, he's important because Rex has got that fearful aspect to him. It's the fear that comes with change, but it's also the fear that we should have as well about whether or not we're doing the right thing. Are we taking the right precautions? And Woody teaches us how to stay grounded in the innovation process. At CDP, we take all three of those characters, all three of those lessons to heart. We dream boldly, we filter ruthlessly, we simplify relentlessly. The infinite does excite us, but it's mastering the finite that turns ideas into real-world innovation. Thank you very much.